Mobile warfare, guerrilla warfare, and positional warfare. 91. A war will take the form of mobile warfare when its content is quick decision offensive warfare on exterior lines, in campaigns and battles within the framework of the strategy of interior lines, protracted war and defense. Mobile warfare is the form in which regular armies wage quick decision offensive campaigns and battles on exterior lines along extensive fronts and over big areas of operation. At the same time, it includes mobile defense, which is conducted when necessary to facilitate such offensive battles. It also includes positional attack and positional defense in a supplementary role. Its characteristics are regular armies, superiorities of forces in campaigns and battles, the offensive, and fluidity. 92. China has a vast territory and an immense number of soldiers, but her troops are inadequately equipped and trained. The enemy's force, on the other hand, are inadequate in number but better equipped and trained. In this situation, there is no doubt that we must adopt offensive mobile warfare as our primary form of warfare, supplementing it by others and integrating them all into mobile warfare. We must oppose only retreat, never advance, which is flightism, and at the same time oppose only advance, never retreat, which is desperate recklessness. 93. One of the characteristics of mobile warfare is fluidity, which not only permits but requires a field army to advance and to withdraw in great strides. However, it has nothing in common with the flightism of the Hanfuqu front. The primary requirement of war is to destroy the enemy, and the other requirement is self-preservation. The object of self-preservation is to destroy the enemy, and to destroy the enemy is in turn the most effective means of self-preservation. Hence, mobile warfare is in no way an excuse for people like Hanfuqu, and can never mean moving only backward and never forward. That kind of moving, which negates the basic offensive character of mobile warfare, would in practice move China out of existence despite her vastness. 94. However, the other view, which we call the desperate recklessness of only advance, never retreat, is also wrong. The mobile warfare we advocate, the content of which is quick decision offensive warfare on exterior lines, in campaigns and battles, includes positional warfare in a supplementary role, mobile defense and retreat, with all of which mobile warfare cannot be fully carried out. Desperate recklessness is military short-sightedness, originating often from fear of losing territory. A man who acts with desperate recklessness does not know that one characteristic of mobile warfare is fluidity, which not only permits but requires a field army to advance and to withdraw in great strides. On the positive side, in order to draw the enemy into a fight unfavorable to him but favorable to us, it is usually necessary that he should be on the move, that we should have a number of advantages such as favorable terrain, a vulnerable enemy, a local population that can prevent the leakage of information, and the enemy's fatigue and unpreparedness. This requires that the enemy should advance, and we should not grudge a temporary loss of part of our territory. For the temporary loss of part of our territory is the price we pay for the permanent preservation of all our territory, including the recovery of lost territory. On the negative side, whenever we are forced into a disadvantageous position which fundamentally endangers the preservation of our forces, we should have the courage to retreat, so as to preserve our forces and hit the enemy when new opportunities arise. In their ignorance of this principle, the advocates of desperate action will contest a city or a piece of ground, even when the position is obviously and definitely unfavorable. As a result, they not only lose the city or ground, but fail to preserve their forces. We have always advocated the policy of luring the enemy in deep precisely because it is the most effective military policy for a weak army strategically on the defensive to employ against a strong army. 95. Among the forms of warfare in the anti-Japanese war, mobile warfare comes first and guerrilla warfare second. When we say that in the entire war mobile warfare is primary and guerrilla warfare supplementary, we mean that the outcome of the war depends mainly on regular warfare, especially in its mobile form, and that guerrilla warfare cannot shoulder the main responsibility in deciding the outcome. It does not follow, however, that the role of guerrilla warfare is unimportant in the strategy of the war. Its role in the strategy of the war as a whole is second only to that of mobile warfare, for without its support, we cannot defeat the enemy. In saying this, we also have in mind the strategic task of developing guerrilla warfare into mobile warfare. Guerrilla warfare will not remain the same throughout this long and cruel war, but will rise to a higher level and develop into mobile warfare. Thus, the strategic role of guerrilla warfare is twofold: to support regular warfare and to transform itself into regular warfare. Considering the unprecedented extent and duration of guerrilla warfare in China's War of Resistance, it is all the more important not to underestimate its strategic role. Guerrilla warfare in China, therefore, has not only its tactical but also its peculiar strategic problems. I have already discussed this problem of strategy in guerrilla war against Japan. As indicated above, the forms of warfare in the three strategic stages of the War of Resistance are as follows. In the first stage, mobile warfare is primary, while guerrilla and positional warfare are supplementary. In the second stage, guerrilla warfare will advance to the first place and will be supplemented by mobile and positional warfare. In the third stage, mobile warfare will again become the primary form and will be supplemented by positional and guerrilla warfare. But the mobile warfare of the third stage will no longer be undertaken solely by the original regular forces. Possibly quite an important part, will be undertaken by forces which were originally guerrilla, but which will have progressed from guerrilla to mobile warfare. From the viewpoint of all three stages in China's War of Resistance against Japan, guerrilla warfare is definitely indispensable. Our guerrilla warfare will present a great drama unparalleled in the annals of war. For this reason, out of the millions of China's regular troops, it is absolutely necessary to assign at least several 100,000 to disperse through all enemy-occupied areas, arouse the masses to arm themselves and wage guerrilla warfare in coordination with the masses. The regular forces so assigned should shoulder this sacred task conscientiously, and they should not think their status lowered because they fight fewer big battles and for the time being do not appear as national heroes. Any such thinking is wrong. Guerrilla warfare does not bring a quick result or a great renown as regular warfare, but a long road tests a horse's strength, and a long task proves a man's heart. And in the course of this long and cruel war, guerrilla warfare would demonstrate its immense power. It is indeed no ordinary undertaking. Moreover, such regular forces can conduct guerrilla warfare when dispersed and mobile warfare when concentrated, as the Eighth Road Army has been doing. The principle of Eighth Road Army is guerrilla warfare is basic but lose no chance for mobile warfare under favorable conditions. This principle is perfectly correct. The views of its opponents are wrong. 96. At China's present technical level, positional warfare, defensive or offensive, is generally impracticable, and this is where our weakness manifests itself. Moreover, the enemy is also exploiting the vastness of our territory to bypass our fortified positions. Hence, positional warfare cannot be an important, still less the principal, means for us. But in the first and second stage of the war, it is possible and essential within the scope of mobile warfare to employ localized positional warfare in a supplementary role in campaigns. Semi-positional mobile defense is a still more essential part of mobile warfare, undertaken for the purpose of resisting enemy at every step, thereby depleting his forces and gaining extra time. China must strive to increase her supplies of modern weapons so that she can fully carry out the task of positional attack in the stage of the strategic counteroffensive. In this third stage, positional warfare will undoubtedly play a greater role, for then the enemy will be holding fast to his positions, and we shall not be able to recover our lost territory unless we launch powerful positional attack in support of mobile warfare. Nevertheless, in the third stage, too, we must exert our every effort to make mobile warfare the primary form of warfare. For the art of directing war and the active role of man are largely nullified in positional warfare, such as that fought in Western Europe in the second half of the World War I. It is only natural that the war should be taken out of the trenches, since the war is being fought in the vast expanses of China, and since our side will remain poorly equipped technically for quite a long time, even during the third stage. When China's technical position will be better, she will hardly surpass her enemy in that respect, and so will have to concentrate on highly mobile warfare, without which she cannot achieve final victory. Hence, throughout the war of resistance, China will not adopt positional warfare as primary. The primary or important forms are mobile warfare and guerrilla warfare. These two forms of warfare will afford full play to the art of directing war and to the active role of man. What a piece of good fortune out of our misfortune. 97. As we have said, war of attrition and war of annihilation. 97. As we have said before, the essence or the object of war is to preserve oneself and destroy the enemy. Since there are three forms of warfare, mobile, positional, and guerrilla, for achieving this object, and since they differ in degrees of effectiveness, there arises a broader distinction between war of attrition and war of annihilation. 98. To begin with, we may say that anti-Japanese war is at once a war of attrition and a war of annihilation. Why? Because the enemy is still exploiting his strength and retains strategic superiority and strategic initiative, and therefore, unless we fight campaigns and battles of annihilation, we cannot effectively and speedily reduce his strength and break his superiority and initiative. We still have our weakness and have not yet rid ourselves of strategic inferiority and passivity. Therefore, unless we fight campaigns and battles of annihilation, we cannot win time to improve our internal and international situation and alter our unfavorable position. Hence, campaigns of annihilation are the means of attaining the objective of strategic attrition. In this sense, war of annihilation is a war of attrition. It is chiefly by using the method of attrition through annihilation that China can wage protracted war. 99. But the objective of strategic attrition may also be achieved by campaigns of attrition. Generally speaking, mobile warfare performs the task of annihilation, positional warfare performs the task of attrition, and guerrilla warfare performs both simultaneously. The three forms of warfare are thus distinguished from one another. In this sense, war of annihilation is different from war of attrition. Campaigns of attrition are supplementary but necessary in protracted war. 100. Speaking theoretically and in terms of China's needs, in order to achieve the strategic objective of greatly depleting the enemy's forces, China in her defensive stage should not only exploit the function of annihilation, which is fulfilled primarily by mobile warfare and partially by guerrilla warfare, but also exploit the function of attrition, which is fulfilled primarily by positional warfare, which itself is supplementary, and partially by guerrilla warfare. In the stage of stalemate, we should continue to exploit the functions of annihilation and attrition fulfilled by guerrilla and mobile warfare for further large-scale depletion of the enemy's forces. All this is aimed at protracting the war, gradually changing the general balance of forces and preparing the conditions for our counteroffensive. During the strategic counteroffensive, we should continue to employ the method of attrition through annihilation so as finally to expel the enemy. 101. But as a matter of fact, it was our experience in the last 10 months that many or even most of the mobile warfare campaigns became campaigns of attrition, and guerrilla warfare did not adequately fulfill its proper function of annihilation in certain areas. The positive aspect is that at least we depleted the enemy forces, which is important both for protracted warfare and for our final victory, and did not shed our blood in vain. But drawbacks are first, that we did not sufficiently deplete the enemy, and second, that we were unable to avoid rather heavy losses and captured little war booty. Although we should recognize the objective cause of this situation, namely the disparity between us and the enemy in technical equipment and in the training of troops, in any case, it is necessary, both theoretically and practically, to urge that our main forces should fight vigorous battles of annihilation whenever circumstances are favorable, and although our guerrilla units have to wage battles of pure attrition in performing specific tasks, such as sabotage and harassment, it is necessary to advocate and vigorously carry out campaigns and battles of annihilation whenever circumstances are favorable, so as greatly to deplete the enemy forces and greatly replenish our own. 102. The exterior lines, the quick decision, and the offensive in quick decision offensive warfare on exterior lines, and the mobility in mobile warfare find their main operational expression in the use of encircling and outflanking tactics, hence the necessity for concentrating superior forces. Therefore, concentration of forces and the use of encircling and outflanking tactics are the prerequisites for mobile warfare, that is, for quick decision offensive warfare on the exterior lines. All this is aimed at annihilating the enemy forces. 103. The strength of the Japanese army lies not only in its weapons but also in the training of its officers and men. Its degree of organization, its self-confidence arising from never having been defeated, its superstitious belief in the Mikado and in supernatural beings, its arrogance, its contempt for Chinese people, and other such characteristics, all of which stem from long years of indoctrination by the Japanese warlords and from the Japanese national tradition. This is the chief reason why we have taken very few prisoners, although we have killed and wounded a great many enemy troops. It is a point that has been underestimated by many people in the past. To destroy these enemy characteristics will be a long process. The first thing to do is to give the matter serious attention, and then patiently and systematically to work at it in the political field and in the field of international propaganda and the Japanese people's movement. In the military sphere, war of annihilation is of course one of the means. In these enemy characteristics, pessimists may find a basis for the theory of national subjugation, and passively minded military men a basis for opposition to war of annihilation. We, on the contrary, maintain that these strong points of Japanese army can be destroyed, and that their destruction has already begun. The chief method of destroying them is to win over the Japanese soldiers politically. We should understand rather than hurt their pride and channel it in the proper direction, and by treating prisoners of war leniently, lead the Japanese soldiers to see the anti-popular character of the aggression committed by the Japanese rulers. On the other hand, we should demonstrate to the Japanese soldiers the indomitable spirit and heroic stubborn fighting capacity of the Chinese army and the Chinese people. That is, we should deal them blows in battles of annihilation. Our experience in the last 10 months of military operation shows that it is possible to annihilate enemy forces. Witness the Pingxingguan and Taizhuang campaigns. The Japanese army morale is beginning to sag. Its soldiers do not understand the aim of the war. They are engulfed by the Chinese armies and by the Chinese people. In assault, they show far less courage than the Chinese soldiers, and so on. All these are objective factors favorable to waging battles of annihilation, and they will, moreover, steadily develop as the war becomes protracted. From the viewpoint of destroying the enemy's overwhelming arrogance through battles of annihilation, such battles are one of the prerequisites for shortening the war and accelerating the emancipation of the Japanese soldiers and the Japanese people. Cats make friends with cats, and nowhere in the world do cats make friends with mice. 104. On the other hand, it must be admitted that for the present we are inferior to the enemy in technical equipment and in troop training. Therefore, it is often difficult to achieve maximum in annihilation, such as capturing the whole or the greater part of an enemy force, especially when fighting on the plains. In this connection, the excessive demands of the theorists of quick victory are wrong. What should be demanded of our forces in the anti-Japanese war is that they should fight battles of annihilation as far as possible. In favorable circumstances, we should concentrate superior forces in every battle and employ encircling and outflanking tactics. Encircle part, if not all, of the enemy forces. Capture part, if not all, of the encircled forces, and inflict heavy casualties on part of the encircled forces if we cannot capture them. In circumstances which are unfavorable for battle of annihilation, we should fight battles of attrition. In favorable circumstances, we should employ the principle of concentration of forces, and in unfavorable circumstances, that of their dispersion. As for the relationship of command in campaigns, we should apply the principle of centralized command in the former and that of decentralized command in the latter. These are the basic principles of field operations for the war of resistance against Japan. The possibilities of exploiting the enemy's mistakes. 105. The enemy command itself provides a basis for the possibility of defeating Japan. History has never known an infallible general, and the enemy makes mistakes, just as we ourselves can hardly avoid making them. Hence, the possibility exists of exploiting the enemy's errors. In the 10 months of his war of aggression, the enemy has already made many mistakes in strategy and tactics. There are 5 major ones. First, piecemeal reinforcement. This is due to the enemy's underestimation of China and also to his shortage of troops. The enemy has always looked down on us. After grabbing the 4 northeastern provinces at small cost, he occupied eastern Hopei and northern Chahar, all by way of strategic reconnaissance. The conclusion the enemy came to was that Chinese nation is a heap of loose sand. Thus, thinking that China would crumble at a single blow, he mapped out a plan of quick decision, attempting with very small forces to send us scampering in panic. He did not expect to find such great unity and such immense power of resistance as China has shown during the past 10 months, forgetting as he did that China is already in an era of progress and already has an advanced political party, an advanced army, and an advanced people. Meeting with setbacks, the enemy then increased his forces piecemeal from about a dozen to 30 divisions. If he wants to advance, he will have to augment his forces still further. But because of Japan's antagonism with the Soviet Union and her inherent shortage of manpower and finances, there are inevitable limits to the maximum number of men she can throw in and to the furthest extent of her advance. Second, absence of main direction of attack. Before the Taizhuang campaign, the enemy had divided his forces more or less evenly between the northern and central China and had again divided them inside each of these areas. In northern China, for instance, he divided his forces among the Tianjin-Pukou, the Beiping-Hankou, and Datong-Puzhou railways, and along each of these lines he suffered some casualties and left some garrisons in the place occupied, after which he lacked the forces for further advances. After the Taizhuang defeat, from which he learned the lesson, the enemy concentrated his main forces in the direction of Suzhou and so temporarily corrected his mistake. Third, lack of strategic coordination. On the whole, coordination exists within the group of enemy forces in northern China and in central China, but there is a glaring lack of coordination between the two. When his forces on the southern section of Tianjin-Pukou Railway attacked Xiaobangbu, those on the northern section made no move, and when his forces on the northern section attacked Taizhuang, those on the southern section made no move. After the enemy came to grief at both places, the Japanese Minister of War arrived on the inspection tour, and the Chief of the General Staff turned up to take charge. And for the moment, it seemed there was coordination. The landlord class, the bourgeoisie, and the warlords of Japan have very serious internal contradictions, which are growing, and the lack of military coordination is one of the concrete manifestations of this fact. Fourth, failure to grasp strategic opportunities. This failure was conspicuously shown in the enemy's halt after the occupation of Nanking and Taiyuan, chiefly because of his shortage of troops and his lack of a strategic pursuit force. Fifth, encirclement of large but annihilation of small numbers. Before the Taizhuang campaign, in the campaigns of Shanghai, Nanking, Changzhou, Baoding, Nankou, Xingkou, and Linfen, many Chinese troops were routed, but few were taken prisoner, which shows the stupidity of the enemy command. These 5 errors, piecemeal reinforcement, absence of a main direction of attack, lack of strategic coordination, failure to grasp opportunities, and encirclement of large but annihilation of small numbers, were all points of incompetence in the Japanese command before the Taizhuang campaign. Although the enemy has since made some improvement, he cannot possibly avoid repeating his errors because of his shortage of troops, his internal contradictions, and other factors. In addition, what he gains at one point, he loses at another. For instance, when he concentrated his forces in northern China in Xuzhou, he left a great vacuum in the occupied areas in northern China, which gave us full scope of developing guerrilla warfare. These mistakes were of the enemy's own making and not induced by us. On our part, we can deliberately make the enemy commit errors. That is, we can mislead him and maneuver him into the desired position by ingenious and effective moves with the help of a well-organized local population, for example, by making a feint to the east but attacking in the west. This possibility has already been discussed. All the above shows that In the enemy's command, too, we can find some basis for victory. Of course, we should not take it as an important basis for our strategic planning. On the contrary, the only reliable course is to base our planning on the assumption that the enemy will make few mistakes. Besides, the enemy can exploit our mistakes just as we can exploit his. It is the duty of our command to allow him the minimum of opportunities for doing so. Actually, the enemy's command has committed errors, will again commit errors in the future, and can be made to do so through our endeavors. All these errors we can exploit, and it is the business of our general in the war of resistance to do their utmost to seize upon them. However, although much of the enemy's strategic and campaign command is incompetent, there are quite a few excellent points in his battle command, that is, in his unit and small formation tactics, and here we should learn from him. The question of the decisive engagement in the anti-Japanese war. 106. The question of decisive engagement in the anti-Japanese war should be approached from three aspects. We should resolutely fight a decisive engagement in every campaign or battle in which we are sure of victory. We should avoid a decisive engagement in every campaign or battle in which we are not sure of victory, and we should absolutely avoid a strategically decisive engagement on which the fate of the whole nation is staked. The characteristics differentiating our war of resistance against Japan from many other wars are also revealed in this question of decisive engagement. In the first and second stage of the war, which are marked by the enemy's strength and our weakness, the enemy's objective is to have us concentrate our main forces for decisive engagement. Our objective is exactly the opposite. We want to choose conditions favorable to us, concentrate superior forces, and fight decisive campaigns or battles only when we are sure of victory, as in the battles at Pingxingguan, Taiyuan, and other places. We want to avoid decisive engagement under unfavorable conditions when we are not sure of victory, this being the policy we adopted in the Changde and other campaigns. As for fighting a strategically decisive engagement on which the fate of the whole nation is staked, we simply must not do so. As witness the recent withdrawal from Suzhou, the enemy's plan for quick decision was thus foiled, and now he cannot help fighting a protracted war with us. These principles are impracticable in a country with a small territory and hardly practicable in a country that is very backward politically. They are practicable in China because she is a big country and is in an era of progress. If strategically decisive engagement are avoided, then as long as the Green Mountains are there, one need not worry about firewood. For even though some of our territory may be lost, we shall still have plenty of room for maneuver and thus be able to promote and await domestic progress, international support, and the internal disintegration of the enemy. That is the best policy for us in the anti-Japanese war. Unable to endure the arduous trial of a protracted war and eager for an early triumph, the impetuous theorists of quick victory clamor for strategically decisive engagement the moment the situation takes a slightly favorable turn. To do what they want would be to inflict incalculable damage on the entire war, spell fitness to the protracted war, and land us in the enemy's deadly trap. Actually, it would be the worst policy. Undoubtedly, if we are to avoid decisive engagement, we shall have to abandon territory, and we must have the courage to do so when, and only when, it becomes completely unavoidable. At such times, we should not feel the slightest regret, for this policy of trading space for time is correct. History tells us how Russia made a courageous retreat to avoid a decisive engagement and then defeated Napoleon, the terror of his age. Today, China should do likewise. 107. Are we not afraid of being denounced as non-resistors? No, we are not. Not to fight at all, but to compromise with the enemy. That is non-resistance, which should not only be denounced but must never be tolerated. We must resolutely fight the war of resistance, but in order to avoid the enemy's deadly trap, it is absolutely necessary that we should not allow our main forces to be finished off at one blow, which would make it difficult to continue the war of resistance. In brief, it is absolutely necessary to avoid national subjugation. To have doubts on this point is to be short-sighted on the question of war and is sure to lead one into the ranks of the subjugationists. We have criticized the desperate recklessness of only advance, never retreat. If it became the fashion, this doctrine would make it impossible to continue the war of resistance and would lead to the danger of ultimate national subjugation. 108. We are for decisive engagement whenever circumstances are favorable, whether in battles or in major or minor campaigns. And in this respect, we should never tolerate passivity. Only through such decisive engagement can we achieve the objective of annihilating or depleting the enemy forces. And every soldier in the anti-Japanese war should resolutely play his part. For this purpose, considerable partial sacrifices are necessary. To avoid any sacrifice whatsoever is the attitude of cowards and of those afflicted by the fear of Japan and must be firmly opposed. The execution of Li Fuying, Han Fuqi, and other rightists was justified within the scope of correct war planning, encouraging the spirit and practice of heroic self-sacrifice and dauntless advance in battle is absolutely necessary and inseparable from the waging of protracted war and the achievement of final victory. We have strongly condemned the flightism of only retreat, never advance, and have supported the strict enforcement of discipline because it is only through heroic decisive engagement, fought under a correct plan, that we can vanquish the powerful enemy. Flightism, on the contrary, gives direct support to the theory of national subjugation. 109. Is it not self-contradictory to fight heroically first and then abandon territory? Will not our heroic fighters have shed their blood in vain? That is not at all the way questions should be posed. To eat, then to empty your bowels. Is this not to eat in vain? To sleep and then to get up. It is not to sleep in vain. Can question be posed in such way? I would suppose not. To keep on eating, to keep on sleeping, to keep on fighting heroically all the way to the Yalu River without a stop. These are subjectivist and formalist illusions, not realities of life. As everybody knows, although in fighting and shedding our blood in order to gain time and prepare the counteroffensive, we have had to abandon some territory. In fact, we have gained time. We have achieved the objective of annihilating and depleting enemy forces. We have acquired experience in fighting. We have aroused hitherto inactive people and improved our international standing. Has our blood been shed in vain? Certainly not. Territory has been given up in order to preserve our military forces and indeed to preserve territory, because if we do not abandon part of our territory when conditions are unfavorable, but blindly fight decisive engagement without the least assurance of winning, we shall lose our military forces and then be unable to avoid the loss of all our territory, to say nothing of recovering already lost. A capitalist must have capital to run his business, and if he loses it all, he is no longer a capitalist. Even a gambler must have money to stake, and if he risks it all on a single throw and his luck fails, he cannot gamble anymore. Events have their twists and turns and do not follow a straight line, and war is no exception. Only formalists are unable to comprehend this truth. 110. I think the same will also hold true for the decisive engagement in the stage of strategic counteroffensive. Although by then the enemy will be in the inferior and we in the superior position, the principle of fighting profitable decisive engagement and avoid the unprofitable ones will still apply and will continue to apply until we have fought our way to the Yalu River. This is how we will be able to maintain our initiative from beginning to end. And as for the enemy's challenges and other people's taunts, we should imperturbably brush them aside and ignore them. In the war of resistance, only those generals who show this kind of firmness can be deemed courageous and wise. This is beyond the ken of those who jump when never touched. Even though we are in a more or less passive position, strategically in this first stage of war, we should have the initiative in every campaign, and of course, we should have the initiative throughout the later stages. We are for protracted war and final victory. We are not gamblers who risk everything on a single throw. The army and the people are the foundation of victory. 111. Japanese imperialism will never relax in its aggression against and repression of revolutionary China. This is determined by its imperialist nature. If China did not resist, Japan would easily seize all China without firing a single shot, as she did the 4 northeastern provinces. Since China is resisting, it is an inexorable law that Japan will try to repress this resistance until the force of her repression is exceeded by the force of China's resistance. Japanese landlord class and bourgeoisie are very ambitious, and in order to drive south to Southeast Asia and north to Siberia, they have adopted the policy of breaking through in the center by first attacking China. Those who think that Japan will know where to stop and be content with the occupation of northern China and Jiangsu and Zhejiang provinces completely fail to perceive that imperialist Japan, which has developed to a new stage and is approaching extinction, differs from the Japan of the past. When we say that there is a definite limit both to the number of men Japan can throw in and to the extent of her advance, we mean that with her available strength, Japan can only commit part of her forces against China and only penetrate China as far as their capacity allows. For she also wants to attack in other directions and had to defend herself against other enemies. At the same time, China has given proof of progress and capacity for stubborn resistance, and it is inconceivable that there should be fierce attack by Japan without inevitable resistance by China. Japan cannot occupy the whole of China, but she still spares no effort to suppress China's resistance in all the areas she can reach, and will not stop until internal and external development push Japanese imperialism to the brink of the grave. There are only 2 possible outcomes to the political situation in Japan. Either the downfall of her entire ruling class occurs rapidly, political power passes to the people, and war thus comes to an end, which is impossible at the moment. All her landlord class and the bourgeoisie become more and more fascist and maintain the war until the day of their downfall, which is the very road Japan is now traveling. There can be no other outcome. Those who hope that the moderate among the Japanese bourgeoisie will come forward and stop the war are only harboring illusions. The reality of Japanese politics for many years has been that the bourgeois moderates of Japan have fallen captive to the landlords and the financial magnates. Now that Japan has launched the war against China, so long as she does not suffer a fatal blow from Chinese resistance and still retains sufficient strength, she is bound to attack Southeast Asia or Siberia or even both. She will do so once war breaks out in Europe. In their wishful calculations, the rulers of Japan have it worked out on a grandiose scale. Of course, it is possible that Japan will have to drop her original plan of invading Siberia and adopt a mainly defensive attitude toward the Soviet Union on account of Soviet strength and of the serious extent to which Japan herself has been weakened by her war against China. But in that case, so far from relaxing her aggression against China, she will intensify it, because then the only way left to her will be to gobble up the weak. China's task of persevering in the war of resistance, the united front, and the protracted war will then become all the more weighty, and it will be all the more necessary not to slacken our effort in the slightest. 112. Under the circumstances, the main prerequisite for China's victory over Japan are nationwide unity and all-around progress on a scale 10 or even 100 times greater than in the past. China is already in an era of progress and has achieved a splendid unity, but her progress and unity are still far from adequate. That Japan has occupied such an extensive area is still not only to her strength, but also to China's weakness. This weakness is entirely the cumulative effort of various historical errors of the last 100 years, and especially of the last 10 years, which have confined progress to its present bound. It is impossible to vanquish so strong an enemy without making an extensive long-term effort. There are many things we have to exert ourselves to do. Here I will deal only with two fundamental aspects: the progress of the army and the progress of the people. 113. The reform of our military system requires its modernization and improved technical equipment, without which we cannot drive the enemy back across the Yalu River. In our employment of troops, we need progressive, flexible strategy and tactics, without which we likewise cannot win victory. Nevertheless, soldiers are the foundation of an army. Unless they are imbued with a progressive political spirit, and unless such a spirit is fostered through progress political work, it will be impossible to achieve genuine unity between officers and men, impossible to arouse their enthusiasm for the war of resistance to the full, and impossible to provide a sound basis for the most effective use of all our technical equipment and tactics. When we say that Japan will finally be defeated despite her technical superiority, we mean that the blows we deliver through annihilation and attrition, apart from inflicting losses, will eventually shake the morale of the enemy army, whose weapons are not in the hand of politically conscious soldiers. With us, on the contrary, officers and men are at one on the political aim of the war of resistance. This gives us the foundation for political work among all the anti-Japanese forces. A proper measure of democracy should be put into effect in the army, chiefly by abolishing the feudal practice of bullying and beating, and by having officers and men share will and woe. Once this is done, unity will be achieved between officers and men. The combat effectiveness of the army will be greatly increased, and there will be no doubt of our ability to sustain the long, cruel war. 114. The richest source of power to wage war lies in the masses of the people. It is mainly because of the unorganized state of the Chinese masses that Japan dares to bully us. When this defect is remedied, then the Japanese aggressor, like a mad bull crashing into a ring of flames, will be surrounded by hundreds of millions of our people standing upright. The mere sound of their voice will strike terror into him, and he will be burned to death. China's armies must have an uninterrupted flow of reinforcement, and the abuses of press ganging and of buying substitutes, which now exist at the lower levels, must immediately be banned and replaced by widespread and enthusiastic political mobilization, which will make it easy to enlist millions of men. We now have great difficulties in raising money for the war, but once the people are mobilized, finances too will cease to be a problem. Why should a country as large and populous as China suffer from lack of funds? The army must become one with the people so that they see it as their own army. Such an army will be invincible, and an imperialist power like Japan will be no match for it. 115. Many people think that it is a wrong method that make for strained relations between officers and men, and between the army and the people, but I always tell them that it is a question of basic attitude or basic principle of having respect for the soldiers and the people. It is from this attitude that the various policies, methods, and forms ensue. If we depart from this attitude, then the policies, methods, and forms will certainly be wrong, and the relations between the officers and the men, and between the army and the people are bound to be unsatisfactory. All three major principles for the army's political work are: first, unity between officers and men; second, unity between the army and the people; and third, disintegration of the enemy forces. To apply these principles effectively, we must start with this basic attitude of respect for the soldiers and the people, and of respect for the human dignity of prisoners of war once they have laid down their arms. Those who take all this as a technical matter and not one of basic attitude are indeed wrong, and they should correct their view. 116. At this moment, when the defense of Wuhan and other places has become urgent, it is a task of the utmost importance to arouse the initiative and enthusiasm of the whole army and the whole people to the full in support of the war. There is no doubt that the task of defending Wuhan and other places must be seriously posed and seriously performed. But whether we can certain of holding them depends not on our subjective desires, but on concrete conditions. Among the most important of these conditions is the political mobilization of the whole army and people for the struggle. 117. In all our work, we must persevere in the anti-Japanese National United Front as the general policy, for only with this policy can we persevere in the war of resistance and in protracted warfare, bring out a widespread and profound improvement in the relation between officers and men, and between the army and the people, arouse to the full the initiative and enthusiasm of the entire army and the entire people in the fight for the defense of all the territory still in our hands and for the recovery of what we have lost, and so win final victory. 118. This question of the political mobilization of the army and the people is indeed of the greatest importance. We have dwelt on it at risk of reputation precisely because victory is impossible without it. There are, of course, many other conditions indispensable to victory, but political mobilization is the most fundamental. The anti-Japanese National United Front is the united front of the whole army and the whole people. It is certainly not a united front merely of the headquarters and members of a few political parties. Our basic objective in initiating the anti-Japanese National United Front is to mobilize the whole army and the whole people to participate in it. Conclusions 119. What are our conclusions? They are: under what conditions do you think China can defeat the undestroyed forces of Japan? 3 conditions are required. First, the establishment of an anti-Japanese united front in China. Second, the formation of an international anti-Japanese united front. Third, the rise of the revolutionary movement of the people in Japan and the Japanese colonies. From the standpoint of the Chinese people, the unity of the people of China is the most important of the three conditions. How long do you think such a war would last? That depends on the strength of China's anti-Japanese united front and many other conditioning factors involving China and Japan. If these conditions are not realized quickly, the war will be prolonged, but in the end, just the same, Japan will certainly be defeated and China will certainly be victorious. Only the sacrifices will be great and there will be a very painful period. Our strategy should be to employ our main forces to operate over an extended and fluid front. To achieve success, the Chinese troops must conduct their warfare with a high degree of mobility on extensive battlefields. Besides employing trained armies to carry on mobile warfare, we must organize great numbers of guerrilla units among the peasants. In the course of the war, China will be able to reinforce the equipment of her troops gradually. Therefore, China will be able to conduct positional warfare in the latter period of the war and make positional attacks on the Japanese occupied areas. Thus, Japan's economy will crack under the strain of China's long resistance, and the morale of the Japanese forces will break under the trial of innumerable battles. On the Chinese side, however, the growing latent power of resistance will be constantly brought into play, and large numbers of revolutionary people will be pouring into the front lines to fight for their freedom. The combination of all these and other factors will enable us to make the final and decisive attacks on the fortifications and bases in the Japanese occupied areas and drive the Japanese forces of aggression out of China. From an interview with Edgar Snow in July 1936. Thus, a new stage has opened in China's political situation. In the present stage, the central task is to mobilize all the nation's forces for victory in the war of resistance. The key to victory in the war now lies in developing the resistance that has already begun into a war of total resistance by the whole nation. Only through such a war of total resistance can final victory be won. The existence of serious weakness in the war of resistance may lead to setbacks, retreats, internal splits, betrayals, temporary and partial compromises, and other such reverses. Therefore, it should be realized that war will be arduous and protracted. But we are confident that through the effort of our party and the whole people, the resistance already started will sweep aside all obstacles and continue to advance and develop. Resolutions on the present situation and tasks of the party, adopted by the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, August 1937. These are our conclusions in the eyes of subjugationists. The enemy are Superman and we Chinese are worthless, while in the eyes of the theorists of quick victory, we Chinese are Superman and the enemy are worthless. Both are wrong. We take a different view. The war of resistance against Japan is a protracted war, and the final victory will be China's. These are our conclusions. 120. My lectures end here. The Great War of Resistance against Japan is unfolding, and many people are hoping for a summary of experience to facilitate the winning of complete victory. What I have discussed is simply a general experience of the past 10 months, and it may perhaps serve as a kind of summary. The problem of protracted war deserves wide attention and discussion. What I have given is only an outline, which I hope you will examine and discuss, amend, and amplify.